Och skriv ner den bön du vill ha svar på under läsningen. Det kan hända du får svar. Det vi ska börja läsa idag är Cameo 14, The Chain of Miscreation. Jag ska dra den här lite närmare så att jag ser bättre. Så. At the beginning of what is now chapter 3 of the text, Jesus gave Helen and Bill an assignment to review the earlier part of the course. The notes Helen had scribed up to this point as a preparation for the next part. However, it seems that on the appointed day, the planned study period did not happen. Instead, little bits of resentment and conflict added up over the course of the day and led to wasted time and to the day ending with the two of them upset with each other. So Jesus decided to give them a lengthy discourse on how this happened, how their errors had ultimately interfered with their review period. As Helen then dictated this material into the text, it was filled out with more material. Our transcript below will be a combination of both the notes and the text, including this one paragraph introduction. The following is the only detailed description which need be written down as to how error interferes with preparation. Jesus had characterized the review as preparation. The events specifically referred to here could be any events, nor does their particular influence matter. It is the process which is to be noted here, and not its results. The kind of beliefs and the fallacious premises involved in misthought are as well exemplified here as elsewhere. There is nothing of special interest about the events described below, except their typical nature. If this is a true course in mind training, then the whole value of this section rests only in showing you what not to do. The more constructive emphasis is, of course, on the positive approach, what to do. Mind watching would have prevented any of this from occurring, and will do so at any time you permit it to. This introduction carefully frames the following discourse. It's not a scolding about their particular events and their negative results. Rather, it's only about what can be learned from the entirely typical process they represent. Yet even then, the discourse focus on what not to do is less constructive than a more positive emphasis on mind watching. And so, Jesus says, this is the only time he's going to give such a discourse. Now the discourse begins. Tell Bill that the reason why he was so strained today is because he allowed himself a number of fear-producing attitudes. They were fleeting enough to be more willow wisps than serious will errors. But unless he watches this kind of thing, he will find the notes fearful. And knowing him well will jag vet inte vad det är för något, misdestinate. Ska vi se. To learn more. Det här, okej. Okej, ingen definition på det. Okej. His unprovoked irritation was oursäktlig, jag kan inte uttala det där, except by himself. And he did not choose to pardon it. You did, but I'm afraid you were under some strain in doing so. This was unfortunate and weakened your own ability to behave healingly toward Bill at the time, and later also toward Louis, both of whom did act stupidly. But one stupidity at a time is usually enough. You are getting too close to the misuse of mental retardation when stupidity sets in all around. Here we see the beginning of what Jesus will later call the chain of miscreation, in which an initial error leads to a whole chain of further errors. The fear-producing attitudes Bill entertains cause him strain. If unchecked, this kind of thing will lead him to fear the course and therefore wrongly distance himself from it. Misdestinate. Okej, då fick vi en förklaring där. Apparently, his strain also contributed on this day to unprovoked irritation. Bill could have pardoned himself for this unpardonable offense, but he didn't. Helen did, but only under strain, which then made her too weak to respond kindly to Bill's stupidity, and Louis too, both of which she thereby compounded with her own. In using the word stupidity, Jesus may simply referencing Helen's thoughts, just as he almost certainly doing with the word unpardonable. That Jesus doesn't really mean unpardonable is shown by the fact that Bill was supposed to have pardoned his error, and Helen rightly did. Bill, having already weakened himself, was very unmiracle-minded first by not asking Dora if she wanted a lift in the cab, which was going her way. Even if she didn't want it, she would have been able to use the thought well. There is probably no human error that is more fear-provoking in the will-behavior conflict sense than countering any form of error with error. The result can be highly inflammable. By reacting to Dora's stupidity with his own, all of the elements which are virtually certain to endanger fear and engender fear have been provided. Bill should note that this is one of the few times that he had to wait for a cab. He thought he took care of it by holding the door of a cab which did come for that lady, but he was misguided in this belief. Beliefs are thoughts and thus come under Christ's guidance, not control. Actually, by giving this cab to her, he was very unkind to you. It was quite apparent that you were extremely cold and also very late. The idea that giving her the cab would atone for his previous errors, was singularly out of place and well calculated to lead to further error. If instead of attempting to atone on his own, he had asked for guidance, there would have been no difficulty whatever in the cab situation. It was not necessary that anyone wait at all. His original slight to Dora, because of his own need to get home, as he perceived it, stopped him from benefiting from the time-saving device of the miracle. He would have gotten home much quicker if he had taken time to use time properly. To reconstruct the above, Dora did something that is called here as an act of stupidity. Bill then responded to her error with an error of his own. He didn't offer to let Dora share the cab that he and Helen were waiting for because of his perceived need to get home quicker. But countering her error with his own led to the exact opposite result. He had to wait for a cab an unusually long time. Had he offered her lift, he would have given her a miracle, an act of kindness. This would then have invoked the time-saving property of miracles, which would have summoned a cab more quickly. Sensing his mistake, he tried to atone on his own way by graciously giving away to another woman the cab that did come. But this was simultaneously a well-calculated unkindness to Helen, who was clearly extremely cold and also very late. Now, without a miracle to save them time, they had to wait. Here then, we have a continuation of the chain of errors, which incorporates Dora's error and stretches onward to impact Helen. You were still suffering from strain, see above, and got quite irritated at the girl who stood next to the door on the side, which blocked its opening. Her presence there made it necessary each time the door was open to hold it for much longer time than was necessary, and you were angry because this made you cold. Actually, the girl was taking care of the younger child who was standing outside, and both of them were really mentally retarded. If you will remember, the older girl asked you very uncertainly about the bus, and you were well aware that at the time of her extreme uncertainty, it would have been much wiser had you built up her confidence instead of associating her with her stupidity. Helen's lingering strain from forgiving Bill then spilled over into irritation at a girl whose position near the door required it to be repeatedly held open a long time, making Helen cold. However, Helen had noticed how extremely uncertain the girl was, and being a specialist in mental retardation in children, she could have put 2 and 2 together and realized the girl was really mentally retarded. Then she could have given her a miracle by building up her confidence. Instead, through Helen's surprisingly dense irritation, she joined the girl in retardation. This reduced your own efficiency. And the only thing that saved you then was that you did remember in the cab to ask me about the notes, instead of assuming that you were necessarily to arrange to meet the next day and go over them. Bill had already become so unguided that it did not occur to him that his own will, which he justified by the contents of the recent notes, a misuse of truth only seemingly on its own behalf, might be questionable. You took poor notes yourself here because you got mad at him on remembering this. You did try to will write in the cab, but did not quite succeed. The error is showing up. Bill thus placed himself in an excellent condition to experience a fear rather than love reaction. Helen Schuckman notes that she was going to write an excellent position, but did not do so. Answer: you are right about the misuse of excellent here, and please do cross it out. You are still angry. An excellent position for miscreation is not a meaningful approach to the problem. It was indeed this courteous, indeed, is not necessary. It was your own error here. I am not saying this with any harsh overtones at all. I am just trying to create better learning conditions for the study periods. We want as little interference as possible for very good reasons. Now, go back to Bill. He was this courteous to you when he told you that he wanted to keep the original copy of the notes, having decided to have it Xeroxed on his own will, and then justifying it by a very slight misinterpretation of what I said about useful for others. In fact, if he will reread the actual quote, he will see that it really means useful for him. You had interpreted it that way, and frankly, this was pretty clear to me at the time. But this sort of thing happens all the time. It should be noted, however, that the result was not only considerable and totally unnecessary planning on Bill's part, but also a failure to utilize what was intended for him as a help for himself. And before you get too self-satisfied, I would remind you that you do it all the time too. Bill acted inappropriately toward you by saying that he wanted to be sure that the original was not lost or dirtied. It is noticeable that having already decided what he wanted to do, it never occurred to him that it is possible that he might lose or dirty them himself, especially as he had not entrusted them to me. This is a form of arrogance that he would be much happier without. You should also note that this would probably not have occurred had he not been already literally off the beam. Be sure to tell him that this pun is to reassure him that I am not angry. If he does not get it or doesn't like it, I know it is not very good. The reason is that he put me in a position where I can really give him very little at the moment. But I want him to know that I am very well aware of the exceedingly few times he now makes errors of this kind. He has come a very long way in this respect. It seems a shame that he should allow himself even this much discomfort from it. The issue here is handling Helen's recent dictation from Jesus in a guided way. Helen had been impaired by her strain in forgiving Bill and her irritation towards the girl, but she partly rescued her state of mind by asking Jesus if she and Bill should meet the next day and go over the notes rather than just assuming they should. Bill did not fare quite so well. In his unguided state, he assumed that he should keep the original copy of the notes for two reasons. First, so that he could photocopy them. Second, so that they would not get lost or dirtied. He justified photocopying the notes by misinterpreting a statement from Jesus that the notes would be useful for others. What you, Helen, wrote can be useful to miracle workers other than yourself. Jesus says, however, that this really refers to Bill, which Bill will see if he will reread the actual quote. The result of this misinterpretation was a mess, not only considerable and totally unnecessary planning on Bill's part, but also a failure to utilize what was intended for him as a help for himself. But before Helen can smugly look down on Bill for this, Jesus says that she too misinterprets his words in service of her own agendas. Indeed, we all do. This sort of thing happens all the time, he says, which implies that his instruction to reread the actual quote is good general advice. Bill's second reason for keeping the notes, to keep them from being lost or dirtied, was likewise riddled with problems. First, it was discourteous to Helen. He acted inappropriately towards you, for it carried the message that the notes would more likely get lost or dirtied if left in her hands than if he took care of them himself. Second, it was arrogant, as it didn't occur to him that he might lose or dirty them himself, especially as he had not entrusted them to me. As Jesus is being quite critical of Bill, he takes great care to communicate love rather than anger. This takes at least three forms. First, he's careful to speak without any harsh overtones at all. Second, he gives Bill a pun, the meaning of which we cannot ascertain, to reassure him that I am not angry. Third, he praises Bill overall progress. He has come a very long way in this respect. However, Jesus is having difficulty getting his loving tone across, in that he has to send it through the warped glasses of Helen's lingering anger toward Bill. This distorts Jesus' words, particularly by adding emphatic words like indeed and excellent that make his tone sound harsher. Jesus is resolute, however, in correcting these distortions. I suggest to you that we pray for him. And I pray for your full cooperation in this. This will correct your errors and will help him react better to the work on the bookcase, which may otherwise lend itself for misuse by misprojection. There would have been no problem at all about the bookcase, and perhaps even no bookcase, if the solution of the storage problem had been left to me. I have promised to guide you out of problems and will certainly not create them for you. But this means that you do not undertake to solve them yourself. A storage problem is hardly more difficult for me to solve than a space problem. See comments under Special Principles for Miracle Workers. The suggestion that Helen pray with Jesus for Bill is expertly designed to correct both Bill's state of mind and her resentment towards Bill. In his current mental state, Bill is clearly prone to trying to handle problems himself without asking for guidance. This is a problem for both Helen and Bill, who Jesus says should not undertake to solve problems themselves. The bookcase is an example of a problem that was not given to Jesus for a solution and to which Bill reacted negatively. A storage problem was noted, a bookcase was decided upon as a solution, and that solution was then implemented. Unnecessary difficulties were created when all that was needed was to turn to Jesus to receive a more efficient solution to the storage problem. You started well in your attempt to pray with me for Bill, but ended badly. This is because you had already made a number of earlier errors. You were wrong to be pleased with Bill Fried's criticism of Rose and should not have enjoyed Bill F's description of Sandwell's caricaturing of her. Caricature of her. You could have laughed with Bill, but not at Rose. Real courtesy never does this. You should know that all God's children are fully worthy of complete courtesy. You should never join with one at the expense of another. When you called Bill about joining Jean and Anna at lunch, you should have waited to ask me. In fact, you should not even have told Anne that you would call. Then you could have asked Bill first if he would want to come and called Anne back. It is true that it was better that he came, but this has nothing to do with the real issue. There are ways of treating others in which only consistent courtesy, even in very little things, is offered. It is a very healing habit to acquire. Bill's answer to your call was a clear statement of his own sadly conflicted state. He said, I don't want to join you, but that's ungracious, so I'll go. Whenever any invitation to join others is in a gracious way is offered, it should always be met with respect, although it need not always to be accepted. However, if it is met ungraciously, the resulting feeling may well be one of correction. Det är inte correction, det är något annat. Coercion. Compelling a party to act in an involuntary manner through the use of threats, including threats to use force against that party. Okay. This is always a split will reaction. Bill did not solve this by acting graciously. The lunch need not have entailed either mental or physical strain for him, and no need to escape should have arisen. This was a regression of the unprofitable kind. Bill will continue to experience this need from time to time until he is willing to realize that there is nothing he needs or wants to escape from. These paragraphs contain a striking picture of moving through the smallest interactions with courtesy, respect, and graciousness. First, Helen's effort to pray for Bill ended badly because her mind was still infected by earlier errors. Specifically, she had relished and laughed at Bill Fried's skewing of Rose. In other words, she had joined with one at the expense of another. By doing so, Helen treated Rose with discourtesy. Rose was apparently not there at the time, yet this is immaterial. In laughing at Rose, Helen was being discourteous to her no matter where she was. And as Jesus reminds her, all God's children are fully worthy of complete courtesy. Helen's discourtesy was still a weight on her mind and had now dragged down her attempts to pray for Bill. Helen was also discourteous to Bill by telling Anne that she was going to invite him to join their lunch. This puts Bill on the spot. Now, if he refused the invitation, Anne would know that he had chosen not to join them. It was true that he should come, Jesus says, but that was beside the point. She could have instead asked for guidance from Jesus, who would have told her to first call Bill without telling Anne she was going to, and then call Anne back. This sort of courtesy, even in little matters, is the very healing habit that Jesus wants her to develop. Bill's response to the lunch invitation is a model of inner conflict. He didn't want to go, but he also didn't want to be ungracious. His will was split, so he decided to solve the split by acting gracious despite his feelings to the contrary. He told Helen, I don't want to join you, but that's ungracious, so I will go. However, responding to the invitation in this way was itself ungracious. Further, by identifying with the one side of his will, the desire to not go, he saw the impetus for going as coming from outside of him. He therefore felt like he was going under coercion rather than of his own accord. While at the lunch, he was still chafing from his hidden desire to not be there, and as a result, experienced strain and a persistent need to escape. This represented the very sort of withdrawal from others, with Jesus' help, he had been overcoming. Hence, Jesus calling the episode a regression. In some, he didn't solve anything by acting on one side of his will, while secretly retraining the other. For that hidden side continued to cry out for satisfaction and continuously undermined things at every step of the way. Jag ska se hur långt det är kvar. Vi kanske får avbryta, och det får vi göra. Vi avbryter där. Och prata lite om texten, och så börjar vi här nästa gång. Så jag känner absolut igen mig i beskrivningen av en kedja av miscreation, och hur det ser ut att vara så oskyldiga tankar i sinnet, apropå de övningar som vi gör just nu. Så ser det ut som att det är en oskyldig tanke av självkritik eller döma någon annan eller vrede som kommer upp, eller att jag kompromissar med vad jag vill och börjar people pleasa. Och när jag inte ser det tillsammans med heligande eller Jesus, så ligger det kvar i mitt sinne. Och också att jag, när det bygger på med många sådana som jag inte är särskilt medveten om, så hör jag inte vägledningen. Även om jag frågar så hör jag inte vägledningen. Så det den här texten ger mig är verkligen motivation att förlåta, att watch my mind as a hawk. Och titta på alla tankarna och ha rutiner av att förlåta. Att jag skriver på morgonen, jag skriver på kvällen, ibland skriver jag under dagen också. Och att göra lektionerna så att jag kan hålla mig tillräckligt klar, så jag kan komma ihåg och fråga heligande, och också ta emot när det kommer vägledning. Någon fler? Marie?
Men jag känner igen det du delar, och när jag lyssnade också, jag tänkte på många antaganden som man har. Man har antaganden och döljer dem för sig själv. Och jag ser också vikten av förlåtelsearbete innan jag ska agera för någonting, innan jag ska ringa någon eller innan något överhuvudtaget, därför att miraklet finns där för alla. Jag tänker på någon gång, om vi har läst eller om det har varit här, att äh, om jag hade åkt till affären till exempel, äh, så hade miraklet kanske varit att träffa kassörskan till exempel. Alltså att miraklet kan utsträcka sig så mycket större. Men om jag håller mig till, ja men jag vet bäst, nej jag vill inte, nej, och inte frågar, inte gör mitt förlåtelsearbete först och frågar, så missar jag ett större mirakel som är för flera. Så jag kände igen mig i mycket av läsningen. Formen så annorlunda ut här, men jag kunde ändå känna igen mig av med egot och alla de här, min tro på egot. Ja, ja jag ser också hur seende Jesus ser liksom den större helheten för alla. Ja, väldigt intressant. Tack.
Och jag känner också igen den här, han är väldigt klar och väldigt tydlig. Och i och med att han känner Bill och Helen, så han behandlar dem lite olika. Med Helen, han är väldigt liksom tydlig, ta bort de där orden och det där använder du bara för att nu tänker du med egot, eller tror att du tänker själv. Och så med Bill så får han som linda in och jag är inte arg. Det här är inte sagt med arga övertoner. Jag använder, han gillade ju humor, Bill, och lekte med ord, så det här med en pann, ordlek, att han lägger in det för att han vet att Bill gillar det, och att han berömmer Bill för att han har varit så duktig och gjort så stora framsteg, att han vet verkligen hur han ska förhålla sig olika till dem, men är väldigt klar med de båda, även om det är mer inbakat där med Bill, så är det ju väldigt tydliga eh, eh, instruktioner. Och det känner jag igen från heliga ande, så är heliga ande med mig också. Väldigt tydliga instruktioner, väldigt tydliga ja, väldigt tydliga nej. Ibland hoppar jag liksom till för det är så himla tydligt. Men att det är så klart är kommunikationen. Mm. Någon fler? Helene?
Ja, jag tyckte det var en bra vad heter det, påminnelse. Många gånger jag gjorde när jag har trott att han gör ju inte så mycket. Det är bara en sån liten grej att jag gick före i kön kanske, eller att jag liksom det är någon liten övertramp, eller ja, gick över någons gräns, eller tänkte på mig själv före någon annan. Och jag vet ju de tillfällena hur det har inte känts rätt. Men nu fick jag så fint förklarat här av Jesus att det har såna här tydliga konsekvenser. Att jag har tänkt liksom, egot har sagt så här, ja, men det gör inte så mycket. Det är inte så viktigt. Fast någonstans så säger samvetet att ja, men det är inte riktigt korrekt på något sätt. Ja, jag tyckte det var lärorik process att ha den här integriteten på något vis i, ja, rakheten. Eller jag kan inte förklara det, men det är någon slags ärlig rakhet. Inte rakhet, men ärlighet är det nog. Det är det som är rakt. Ärligt. Det är ärligt. Det var det som kom till mig. Tack.
Tack för det. Då ska vi avsluta och det blir läsning nästa torsdag. Det är den 23. Då fortsätter vi på samma Cameo. Vi ses när du har lust. Hej hej!